what I'm talking about tonight is awakening. And what is awakening? Is focusing on awakening in alignment with the Soto Zen tradition. Is awakening even possible for householders through internet-based training? If so, how? And jumping right to the conclusion, really. So, not hiding where we're going. I'll suggest that the Soto Zen tradition reclaim its long history of awakening, the call and response of the four great vows. One way that one translation, I think, Danielle, maybe you know better than I think this is from Eiken Roshi, but this is the version that we've come to use here on the Vine of Obstacles. The many beings are numberless, vowing to carry them across. Greed, anger, and ignorance arise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road. Dharma gates are countless, vowing to wake to them all. And Buddha's way is all embracing, vowing to follow through. So I suggest that we reclaim this narrative and practice of enlightenment, and that we focus our training efforts in order to support, especially householders, really. Householders are such a large portion of the population of Zen students. So I think probably the entire body, Allison, maybe you know better than I, but the entire population of practicing Zen students is, at least in the US, maybe 10 or 15,000 people. So we're kind of like a small community. And and of those 10 or 15,000 people, all but maybe a few hundred are in monasteries right now. So it seems really vital that we focus our teaching and training efforts to support householders. Now, I'm aware, of course, that there are different views about awakening. And I'll also be suggesting that the Soto Zen Buddhist Association hear the voices of those who have had awakening experiences and who value their importance in our own practice, and for those of us that are teachers, for the practice of our students. At the same time, my goal tonight isn't to convince those of you who see it differently, and especially, hopefully, some more of the members of the SCPA will watch this on YouTube. It's not my goal to convince you to see it differently, but to explain how some of us see it. And of course, I'm speaking for myself, but this is, for my practice and training during these past 44 years. It's where I'm at now, and I have some company in this perspective. So I'm not, authorized to speak for them, but still, it feels like it's a bigger thing than just me. So I'm a little confused about the pronoun I should use here. So, really wanting to ask for a non-judgmental inclusion here, and that the Soto Zen Buddhist Association embrace diversity with regard to views about awakening. Now, you might wonder, is that necessary? Well, yeah, it is. So here's the passage from the Soto Zen Buddhist website, and some, I very much value the work people have been doing there. And here's the passage: meditation without a goal. It says that's what we're about. Might be okay, right? As everyone is already inherently enlightened, seated silent meditation is an expression of this. So there's various kind of buzzwords that pop up there that actually exclude a good share, from my point of view, of the membership's perspective on awakening and the point of this practice. And we'll get into the detail a little bit later. Now, there are some really great models for inclusion and respecting diversity within the Soto lineage. And one thing I'm going to do tonight is give you multiple citations. So I usually don't give so many citations, but I've got a bunch queued up here for you. The first one is from Rujing Zenji, Dogen's teacher, right? And he asked about what is the school of Dongshan, the school of Soto or Saodong lineage. He, quoting somebody else, offered the image of Mount Sumero, the mountain at the center of the Buddhist cosmology, the center of the universe in vast space. He said there's this mountain. And then the lineages are like the sun, moon, planets that rotate around the vast central pillar. So very diverse, right? Not privileging any particular lineage. Dogen also, as you may know, said that he didn't think that we should call it Zen at all. He said, in his Dogen-esque way, that people who called what we're doing Zen have a very limited view. They thought that Bodhidharma was sitting in the cave practicing samadhi. No. So samadhi or jhana, and then chan, and then Zen. So he said that we should refer to our work just as the Buddha Dharma, just as the awake truth, if you will. Also, by the way, we have two Kechimyaku blood veins extant from Dogen, at least two that I know about. And in both of these blood veins with the lineages, in one, it was given to a monk named Kakushin, who then went to China and received Dharma transmission eventually from the great Linchi Rinzai teacher Wu Men, the author of the Gateless Barrier. And he came back to Japan to teach, of course. But one Kechimyaku was given to him, and on that Kechimyaku, Dogen wrote the Rinzai lineage, his Rinzai lineage, which he inherited from his first teachers, his Soto lineage, and also his Tendai lineage, which is very complex and branched in all sorts of directions, which was his training basically as a teenager. The second Kechimyaku that we have within Dogen's hand has just the Rinzai and Tendai lineages. So it's very curious, and it's such a small sample, of course, we don't really know if it's representative or not, but we know that at least in these two cases, he included his Tendai lineage. So he really saw himself as teaching Buddha Dharma, not really Zen. So there's that. Then a few generations later, Keizan. You should know that fundamentally there is no separation between Qingyuan and Nanyue. And those are the two branches that split off from the sixth ancestor and eventually became Soto and Rinzai. There is fundamentally no separation. Menzan in the 18th century, important reformer. Some of you heard this. I've been preaching about this one a lot lately. Menzan, who reformulated and reinvigorated Soto Zen, early 18th century, Hakuin's time. He said the Soto and Rinzai schools are without question one track. There are no side roads. And he also, by the way, almost got his wish, because in the 1870s, during the Meiji Reformation, the Meiji government ordered the Soto, Rinzai, and Obaku schools to come together. There really wasn't a central organization at all. There was just temple lineage systems. And everybody refused. And then they ordered just the Eiheiji and Sojiji lines of Soto Zen to come together. They refused and got into, really lots of conflict. So finally the government said, you must get along. And there was actually a law passed that said that the Sojiji branch and the Eiheiji branch of Soto Zen had to get along and come together as one denomination. So then they did. I wonder, though, what would have happened and how that would have impacted our Zen world now if not so long ago, maybe the heads of the various schools had knew each other and liked each other. Maybe like they could have worked it out. It would be a very different Zen scene now. And also Katagiri Roshi, my root teacher, often said that he recommended that we return to the Zen of the sixth ancestor. So what is the one track with no side roads? And I'd propose it's not, I don't think, a radical proposal, as we're Buddhists after all, awakening-ists. I propose that is awakening. And that we can do that. We can come together in that way, while at the same time respecting all the different, the diversity in our different lineage traditions. So, after all, isn't the aim of every Buddhist to see with the same eyes, hear with the same ears as Shakyamuni Buddha? And from the earliest times of our tradition, this is what the Buddhas and ancestors have promised as a real possibility. Not that you had to wait for many lifetimes in order to get a favorable rebirth where you would then be able to wake up, but the possibility of awakening in this very life. I think that's a much more powerful and energetic message about what this work is about than trusting and believing that we're already awakened and that silently sitting on the cushion is an expression of it. Some people may be very moved by that. And so no argument with that really, but it's just one expression. So let's get into this. First with three views of awakening, and then some awakening stories. And then I want to talk a little about the possibilities for householder practice, particularly what we're doing with the Vine of Obstacles. And then there'll be some time, I think, for Dharma dialogue. So first, these three views of awakening. Now, when I shared with one of my friends and colleagues, one of the real jewels, Soto Zen, Kokyo Hinkle Sensei, when I shared with him what I was going to be talking about, he wrote, "I imagine everyone would agree that awakening is the essence of Dogen's teaching and Soto practice, but many might think of it simply being present in our daily activities." And, well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that we all would agree. So awakening is kind of one of these hot button issues, I think, in Soto Zen. I think much less so than in other forms of Zen. But it's even controversial whether it's controversial or not. We can't agree whether it's a controversy or not. Kokyo, by the way, is quite a scholar monk, and he did a search of the Shobogenzo, Dogen's, one of the teaching collections of Dogen's work, and I think this is of the 95 Fascicle Shobogenzo. And in it, Dogen himself uses one of the three main characters for awakening 1,155 times. 1,155 times. And for those of you interested, of the three, one character, Sho, which means verification, it's often thought that Dogen had, I've heard numerous times, that Dogen had a strong preference for this character, verification. Nice character, important aspect of awakening, to verify the truth that we're already awakened. He used that character 446 times, or just a little bit less than 39%. Go, which this character has a sense of awakening as opposed to delusion. It's usually pronounced satori in Japanese. This character he used 372 times at 32%. Kaku he used 337 times for 29%. Kaku has the sense of awakening as if asleep. So these different metaphors for the characters. So it's pretty even, actually. It's pretty balanced. At the same time, in the Shobogenzo, Dogen uses the characters for shikantaza, often translated as just sitting, 6 times. 1155 for awakening, 6 for shikantaza. Actually, and of those 6, he doesn't talk about shikantaza at all as a meditation practice. He includes it as a koan that his teacher Rujing gave him that resulted in his awakening. So, the first perspective in Soto Zen on awakening, and that is, I think, the SCBA statement summarized it nicely. We're already awakened, and silent meditation is a manifestation of it. So, meditation without a goal. One student told me about a friend of his who is a practitioner at a Soto Zen community, a Soto Zen community in the U.S. And she believed that she'd had a Kensho experience. So she went to the teacher and told the person about it. And she was told she was inherently enlightened. No need to be awakened again. So disregard the experience. I suggest that that's not the best way to serve people, frankly. That can you disregard any experience, really? Just forget about that one. That didn't happen. And for people who have had Kensho awakening experiences, they're often among the experiences in life that are most important. So are we really doing people a service by telling them to disregard it? I don't think so. And also, this perspective is often talked about as the original enlightenment perspective, Hongaku in Japanese. But in the teaching on original enlightenment, especially, is found in the Awakening Faith and the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment. In those texts, that's just the one side of it, right? That we're inherently enlightened. Both of those texts also provide a process and an urgency to actually verify that. And, Dogen himself, the great founder of Soto Zen in Japan, this is the question that arose for him, that brought him to great doubt and a burning urgency in his practice to resolve, was that if we're already enlightened, why did all the Buddhas and ancestors practice so diligently? Why? So at 16, he left the Tendai school and became a ferocious Zen student, including sitting up without sleeping for 2.5 years. From this point of view, that we're already inherently enlightened, and so if you have an experience of enlightenment, it ought to be disregarded. The notion that someone would have an awakening experience shows that it wasn't awakening, because awakening is not an object of perception. And this, of course, is the case. This is the case. If it's and we use this term for it, for awakening Kensho, which I've used already, which literally means just 2 characters, see nature. And Dogen had an issue with this character, with this construction, for that reason, that awakening is not something that is seen in that way. Meido Moroshi, who is here with us, or was, I don't see him on this screen, just had a very nice talk about this, and it's posted on his Patreon page. And in it, he says just exactly this: that so it's the same in Rinzai and in Soto that enlightenment is not an object of perception, but that doesn't mean there's no enlightenment. So Nato suggested words for after this experience that there's this kind of knowledge or a recognition. And in one of the 13th century Cao Dong texts that I've been working with, one of the great teachers there, Lin Chuan, uses the phrase supernormal cognition for this. Supernormal cognition or remarkable ability. Dogen calls this the traceless trace. So, just a little bit more of the first perspective. And some, as I said earlier, tomato, that I was hoping to, have some gentle challenges. Is it, so far, is that working? Is it gentle challenges? Am I going too far? I see some of you smiling, some of you not. So just one more challenge, and then we'll go on. So Dogen's question brought him to go to China. Well, first to train in Japan, probably resolve that question in Japan, and then went to China. And when he had his great enlightenment experience, he didn't go, "Oh, I guess there's nothing. There's nothing to awaken. There's no awakening," So he didn't go in and bow to Rujing and say, "Oh, I get it. There's nothing to get. I'm going home." He went in and bowed, and they had heart-to-heart connection. I won't go through the whole story tonight, but Rujing recognized it in him and said, dropped off, composed, thundering, And this story is also questioned by some Soto Zen teachers, whether this really happened or maybe somebody later on made it up, because Dogen doesn't include this story anywhere in the Shobogenzo, so it's a good point. But after Dogen died, one of his students, Gian, went to China with his collected works, they abbreviated his collected works, and he went walking around China and basically looking for a couple people to write blurbs for the text. And the two that he found, one was my good buddy Zhu Tong, Empty Hall, who had a connection with Rujing, Dogen's teacher, and maybe knew Dogen. One of the things he says, actually, in his very short preface, Zhu Tong does, he said that Dogen went beyond his teacher. And that's a remarkable thing for a Chinese Chan abbot of the 13th century to say about a foreigner. And Rujing had been the abbot of one of the temples that Zhu Tong was abbot of. So, and they had a student-teacher relationship for it. So for him to say that was quite something. The other person that Gian found to write a blurb for the Eihei Goroku was a monk named Yi Yun. And Yi Yun happened to be Rujing's attendant when Dogen came in and bowed, and Rujing acknowledged his awakening. And so about 30 years after this event, Gian was able to find the person who was attending Rujing at the time, who at the time said, "It is truly not a trifling thing for a foreigner to attain to such a degree." And Yi Yun acknowledged that. So we actually have a third-party verification of Dogen's Great Awakening. So that it may or may not be, that it may be a fiction, I think, is something that should be put to rest. Historically, it's very rare that we would have something from the 13th century where there was a third-party verification, but here it is. So that's the first perspective in my gentle challenges to it, I hope. The second one is a bit more coarse. Sorry. But this one also comes from a couple students who went to a Soto Zen temple. They were visiting a city in the U.S. and went and had tea with the teacher. And they said, well, what about Kensho in Soto Zen? And he said, Kensho is bullshit. So it's a little more coarse. It's not that you're already awakened, so you don't need to be awakened. It's a stronger rejection of awakening. Another friend who's a priest and teacher at one of the larger Soto communities said that his community is rabidly anti-Kensho. So I think it is a controversy. And some of this, and actually both of these people may have been referring, as I said, to Dogen having an issue with this word. But Dogen was a quirky guy, brilliant and quirky. So he had these opinions about stuff, like brilliant, quirky people often do. And so some of his quirk we take, and some of it we reject. Like, well, we shouldn't use the word Zen. Well, even the people that were like closest with Dogen, as soon as he's dead, they're calling it Soto Zen. So they knew, they got it, right? That's the old boss's quirkiness, That doesn't work. We got to tell people we're something. So yeah, we're in the Soto Zen school. So if we're going to be strictly following the letter of Dogen, then we should also not call ourselves Zen. We certainly shouldn't call ourselves Soto Zen. So that's kind of a problem, I'd say. And also, if we're going to follow the letter of Dogen, actually, Dogen was incredibly creative, rewriting sutras, rewriting koans. So the letter of Dogen is actually to be incredibly creative. So there's that. By the way, Dogen uses the word Kensho 11 times in the Shobogenzo, all with this sense that, it's not a good term. Yeah. We can come back to that and maybe clarify that point later if somebody's interested in that. So the third approach is that an abrupt, non-dual embodiment is possible. It's vitally important in terms of our bodhisattva vows to carry all beings across. The myriad things come forth and illuminate the self. Dawi said it's about being unattached to all thoughts that we may reach the perfectly clear, bright mind of prajna and have immediate enlightenment on the great matter. Thereby we receive the transmission of the deep wisdom of the Buddhas and save all beings who suffer in the round of birth and death. Dogen also put it like this, I think, embracing this third perspective. He said, although this inconceivable dharma is abundant in each person, it is not actualized without practice. It is not experienced without realization. And Keizan, truly, although it has unmistakably been thus from innumerable kalpas, if you do not strike it at least once, you cannot know that you yourself are the wisdom mother of all the Buddhas. I really like that he's got that wisdom mother of all the Buddhas in there. So, let's see. I'd also point out that even if it was the case that Dogen and Keizan, Zenji, and many other Soto teachers through the centuries since Dogen and Keizan, even if they said that you are already enlightened, so if you have an experience of enlightenment, discard it. What about the lamp collections that highlight the aha of awakening? Thousands, literally thousands of Zen masters, So did Dogen see himself? We call him the founder, but he brought Soto Zen to Japan. I don't believe that he saw himself as the founder of a religion that was somehow different than the thousands of awakened teachers before him. Again and again in Chobo Genzo, for instance, he credentials himself by sharing his lineage that went back to the Buddha, and especially to Bodhidharma, is what he emphasizes in the Chobo Genzo. There's no evidence in the Chobo Genzo, in my view, that he saw himself as starting a new religion. So there are a number of criticisms of this perspective, this third perspective. And I just want to address one here for now, tonight. And this one comes from Domyo Burke Sensei, who in Rick McDaniel's forthcoming book on, I think it's called Zen Conversations, which is really lovely, by the way. Rick shared a manuscript version with me. And as many of you probably know, Rick writes these books by interviewing people. And I think some of the people here have been interviewed by Rick. He's a very good interviewer, gets people talking. He says it's his last book, but he said that for the last 3 books. I think that it was the last one, Zen Conversations, and I think there's probably 40 Zen teachers that are quoted in the book. The range of views on stuff is great. There's this just wonderful diversity on all sorts of things, including on the issue of awakening. Domyo says in his book, she says, "I'm dear friends with several people who've had certified Kenshos." And I'm like, well, clearly that didn't solve any problems. They still struggle with a personal sense of inadequacy and insecurity and all that stuff. So huh? So I think that, sure, a single Kensho, it's not like magic, It's not like this magic thing that you immediately, all of your problems are gone. And of course, awakening experience actually helps us be more who we are. And an initial awakening experience is just that. They range widely in depth and breadth. And they're the beginning. They're really the first step on the path. So I think it's unfair to expect that someone would have one Kensho experience and then that they would all of their personal problems would disappear immediately. Well, it doesn't work like that in reality. To really integrate that experience takes years of work. And that's why in the koan introspection tradition, there's hundreds of barrier gates following this initial opening. It's just the beginning. So in his Zen letters, Yuan Wu says, truth requires sudden awakening, but the phenomenal level calls for gradual cultivation. And certainly, over time, the greed, anger, and ignorance are attenuated or maybe better yet, transmuted into, the lifeblood of benefiting living beings. Hakuin said, even if you are able to enter through the gate of non-duality If you lack the Bodhi mind, you'll end up under Mara's sway. Anyone who wants to achieve complete mastery of the Dharma has to spur forward the wheel of the four great universal vows. So those are the four vows of compassionate activity become the basis and the spur for continued training, not settling with just some little intimation of the way, but vowing to carry all beings across. And now a few Soto people saying the same thing. Kishizawa Ian Roshi, Kishizawa Ian Roshi was the teacher of Suzuki Roshi, and actually Suzuki Roshi and Katagiri Roshi met doing a training with Kishizawa Ian Roshi. And Tomoe-san, Katagiri's wife, and Katagiri met doing a workshop, a retreat of some kind, with Kishizawa Ian Roshi. He was one of the great teachers of Soto Zen in the 20th century. He said, because enlightenment must not remain, you must grind it off completely until there is not even a speck of enlightenment. When you reach the point of no stink of enlightenment, where there is no trace, you vow with great determination to let the absence of enlightenment continue long, 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 like a single rail of iron for myriad miles. This is really a wonderful expression of post-Kensho training. Katagiri Roshi said, the experience of enlightenment is important for us. The experience of enlightenment is important for us, but it is not enough. Certainly it isn't. Again and again, that enlightenment must become more profound until it penetrates our skin, muscle, and bone. Suzuki Roshi said, it is not that Satori is unimportant, but it's not the part of Zen that needs to be stressed. And we'll return to that later. And also here's a poem to close this, a little phrase from a poem by Thomas Tranströmer, the great Swedish poet, won the Nobel Prize. He said, I have graduated from the University of Oblivion and am as empty-handed as the shirt on the washing line. I think that's a lovely expression for post-Kensho training as well. All right. I'm talking more than I thought I would. Normally, I co-teach with my wife and teaching partner, Tetsugan Sensei, and I normally only talk for like 15 minutes or so. So this is a lot. But hang in there with me, please. So now what I want to offer you is a stream of enlightenment stories, abbreviated. And we're not going to start with Dogen or Keizan, but I want to, scroll forward. This is to the point of how Soto Zen could reclaim the narrative of awakening stories within the tradition. One great teacher in the Katagiri Roshi Soto lineage, Geshe Soko Zenji. Also, he's in the 17th century, 72nd generation successor. And Dogen is 51st, so 20 generations after Dogen. Moonlit Boat Rustic Essence is his name. He was given the koan Mushin, Mu mind, by his teacher. And his teacher told him, be Mushin, see nature. Very simple, and the same instruction that's given today. Be Mushin, see nature. This opened up this great wall of doubt for him. And he threw himself into his practice with passion, pondered this phrase day and night. And he tells the story of this. He says it came to a head, so to speak, when he was sitting in the outhouse. He was concentrating on this great doubt. And as time passed, he says, I forgot to leave. Suddenly, a violent wind came up, first blowing the outhouse door open and then shut again with a loud crash. 10,000 things instantly advanced and ripped apart my previous doubt. It was like suddenly awakening from a dream or remembering something forgotten. I began to dance in a way that I had never learned, and there were no words to convey this great joy. Scrolling forward a bit more, Nishiari Okusan Zenji, who was also a great Soto reformer, end of the 19th and early 20th century. He was the teacher for Kishizawa Ian Roshi and a number of the other important teachers of the 20th century. And Yasutani Roshi was actually his attendant for a while. So Nishiari Bokusan Zenji, he was a tenzo at a monastery and came back from some errand, and his attendant brought him some water for his feet. It was wintertime, and the feet were cold. So he brought him some water, but it was too hot, so the attendant went and got some snow and threw the snow in the hot water. And as the snow melted in the hot water with this shoo, Nishiari had great awakening. In his biography, it uses those characters, actually, for great satori. The translator says he greatly understood, but I checked the characters, and this character can be understood as understood, but it's more commonly, and especially in this context, great satori. He wrote a verse, grabbing up the snow and throwing it into the water, heaven and earth are cast off. Mount Meru, Sumeru, collapses. I do not know what season it is. Suzuki Roshi also, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, founder of San Francisco Zen Center, had what he thought was a great awakening experience as a young monk. He was doing something like playing cards or something with a couple other monks, and he went into the cellar to get some melons. And while he was in the cellar, somebody turned off the light. So it was completely dark, and he's holding a couple melons. And he turned around, and there was a hook hanging from the ceiling. I don't know, maybe a fish hook. It doesn't say in the story. And it caught him by the eyebrow. And you can see in pictures, actually, of Suzuki Roshi that he still had a scar here where he was hung for hours in this completely dark cellar with these two big melons just standing there. There was nowhere to go. His biographer, David Chadwick, says that all he would say later in life is that he had had an important awakening experience. Katagiri Roshi also, sitting at Tassajara, he was 40 and had been practicing Zazen with a passion since he was 18, sitting on a very hot day. And I don't know how this would happen, but this was probably 69 at Tassajara, and apparently everybody didn't have to come to Zazen. So he said that like he was about the only person that came to Zazen, and he was sitting there and sweating, and he thought how stupid I am, and then had great awakening. Also, more current, also a woman taking a walk during a sesshin, working intently on the gateless barrier, case 35. The woman Chen separates from her spirit. Wuzu asks, which is the true one? She sees a broken turtle shell and realizes that this broken shell is her, is the true one. I am not it, but in truth it is me. A flood of tears and relief. Another woman, a householder, in her car on the way home from work. She's practiced for decades, dozens of 7-day sesshins. Recently with a new teacher, and now digging into Mu. While driving, she's listening to an opera on the car stereo, and when the soprano hits a high note in the aria becomes her. Profound joy. I think it's important that we tell our enlightenment stories so that we normalize the experience. And I know that for some folks they can be troubling, bringing up feelings of lack or competition, self-loathing even. And those are important things to face and work through. But they also give us, many of us, faith and confidence in this way. And to ignore them, I think, does a disservice. If you're interested in this genre, Henry Shukman Sensei, friend and colleague, has a really nice recent book, One Blade of Grass, where he tells his story in much detail from his early opening experiences to the more definitive experiences later in his life. So now, let me just touch on what we're doing in the Vine very briefly so that there's at least a few minutes at the end for questions. We've been doing the Vine of Obstacles for 8 years now. Dave Chibatsu Laser is here. He was the hi Dave. He was the first person that I met online in this way 8 years ago, almost to the day here, right, Dave? During the pandemic, we've transitioned, like many people have, into doing online work. And one person said, I think someone here tonight said, before the Vine, I thought I had a home practice, but it turns out I didn't really. So it's possible through online, the online venue, to, I think, really strongly support people doing this work at home. I think one of the key things, to keep this brief, one of the key things to appreciate is that it's a different modality. It's not a monastery. It's not in person. So if we just try to do what we do in person online, it doesn't work that well. There's a lot of dispersion. And what I see happening in a lot of online practice these days is people doing enormous amount of Dharma browsing, which is fine, but if you really want to go deeply into the Dharma, you need to focus. So we tell our people over and over and over, focus, 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 and you don't need to go to a Dharma talk. I think you could probably just live online in Dharma talks, right? And then what, without the actual practice, including koan, but more than that, zazen study engagement, we say, without a full toolkit, as it were, of practices, it's just, in the head. Let's see if there's anything really vital there. So in our work online, I guess it's the name of the talk, Cyber Zen. I didn't get to it till 7:20. Sorry about that. We emphasize that same kind of spirit of Soto Zen, careful attention to detail, utilizing online sharing as we would utilize how someone rings a bell as an opportunity for Dharma presentation and instruction. We also strongly emphasize person-to-person meetings. So one of the teachers, Tetsugun Sensei or Ed Goshen, or I meet with everybody on the Vine every week for 15 minutes. We also have small bits of instruction and Dharma teaching, 5 days a week, 2 days off. Something small and manageable to dig into each day. Right now, we're working through the Record of Empty Hall. Again, important thing is that online work is different than in-person work. It has different strengths and weaknesses. And, in-person work of any kind. And in my view, from what I've seen these last 8 years, is that a combination is best, because with this new technology, we can really support people much better, not compared to a monastery, but compared to in-person work in the community. What I've seen is that we can support people in doing this work much better than we could doing in-person work when somebody's coming to the Zen Center every day for Zazen. I think that we can do more with this technology than we could in person. But it's also really important that there be in-person sesshin to back that up, basically. The body practice aspect of our tradition, which is essential, is very difficult to convey, of course, through the screen. So there's that negative, definitely.